The problem I solve is I help individuals, teams, and organizations change and transform. The greatest skill you can have going forward is learning how to work with AI and AI agents. And what I say to people is there's a formula for change, but change is not formulaic. My purpose is to be the kind of person that others will look at and believe change is possible.
Welcome back to the Human Capitalist Podcast. I am your host, Trent Cotton, the Human Capitalist. And today my guest is an author, just all around fantastic guy. I've been following his content on LinkedIn and said, you know what, got to have him on the show. So, Mr. Michael, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Trent. It's great to be here.
Well, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so you mentioned author. I would add speaker and consultant to that. I have spent the better part of the majority of my career in big consulting, and about a year and a half ago, almost 2 years, decided to venture out on my own. And the problem I solve is I help individuals, teams, and organizations change and transform. And in the background here, you can see the book I just released about 6 weeks ago, called Change. And really, my goal and my role is to give people the tools and the secrets and the science and the data on how to really change and what happens to us when we try to change. And so we can dive into what that means, but it's really been a great journey for me, and just happy to be out here helping people get better.
I think you are textbook for how you're supposed to introduce yourself. I love that. Because a lot of times I usually have to come back, and especially with vendors, what problem are you trying to solve? And you just freaking lead with it. I love that.
I appreciate that. Yeah.
Audience, if you get nothing else out of this and you are wanting to speak and you are wanting to introduce yourself, he just taught you a masterclass on how to get it done. That was textbook. I love it.
That's great.
So, all right. One of the things that we always talk about, I like to ask every guest, is in the world of human capital, what do you see changing over the next I used to say 1 to 5 years, but things are changing so fast. Let's just say the next year.
Yeah.
Let's keep it realistic, right?
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, we've been through a lot already, right? And I love your podcast because it's really about people. And I think for as much as we talk about AI, and that certainly is, I think, where most conversations start. I just did a post on this last night. I'm going to have a guest on my LinkedIn Live series talking about AI. Is it still about people, right? And, I think as long as you have people in your company, I say this all the time, I can help you change because, unless you're truly employing an army of bots and AI agents, there's still human beings that need an experience. And so for me, I think it starts with us understanding that there's a relationship between technology and people, and it's really still about people. And so we're seeing this now, and what's happening in the government space, and some of that, very, tension-filled experience about people. So a couple things to add to that. I think certainly AI is a big piece, and we've got to learn how to work with it. We're all worried about AI replacing us, and I think it's really, someone said this to me the other day, the greatest skill you can have going forward is learning how to work with AI and AI agents. And I think for all of us, we have a personal responsibility to gain those skills at whatever age or whatever phase you are in life. And then I think, from a company perspective, companies that understand there's no putting the genie back in the bottle when it comes to the hybrid work model, and the flexible work arrangement, those companies that are really, I think, being dogmatic about their approach, I think, are going to struggle to find talent in ways that really help them in the long term. So it's this balance between our personal responsibility to change and evolve with technology and the organizational relationship to understand how to really harness talent and be sustainable going forward.
Are there any AI trends that you've got your eye on? And if so, why?
For me, it's about understanding workflows and how to patch together the AI experiences that you want. I'm in the sort of solopreneur space, right? And I mean, I have a network of people that I work with, but, I think it's understanding how to get the right tools and then have them talk to each other in ways that really augment your experience. Most of us are using AI, I think, at a pretty, I wouldn't say surface level, but a pretty basic level right now. We're helping find ways to make some simple things that we do faster, bigger, better, stronger. And that's great. I think the next level for us is really understanding how to tie them together, right? How do I get one agent who's helping me with scheduling to get another agent who's helping me with posting to get another agent who's helping me now with taking video content and slicing it up and, scheduling it, right? There's a lot of tools that do that. And I think now it's about how do I create workflows that really help me not have to be in the middle of each of those interactions. That's really the next big thing, I think, for us individually. Then I think what comes after that is really the creativity of exploration and what does that mean in terms of solving new problems.
So, what made you at this point in the job market and with all
Yeah.
of this change, what made you say, hey, you know what, it's a good time for me to go on my own?
Oh,
I mean,
well,
so many
that
people are just like, so scared, and you're like, just balls to the wall, like, yeah, screw it, let's just do
well,
this.
some of it was I did to myself, some of it was done to me. And it's like
Hmm.
anything, I think it's a journey, right? So a short story, but it's a short version of a long story. I worked in big consulting for years doing organizational change management, helping big companies change and kind of leaning into that discipline. And right around 2019, I started to realize that the things we're doing aren't working, right? A lot of well-meaning, well-intentioned people working in the HR space, mostly around this thing called organizational change management, good people doing hard work with good intentions, but 70%, you see the stats of all transformations fail. And I couldn't reconcile the
Yep.
fact that we were doing the same things and yet not getting the results we wanted. So that started me down a path of really starting to think about what's happening at the microscopic level in us when we try to change. I have a background in athletics and college football and working with the military. And I was like, we show up to work and we forget that we're human beings and we forget that there's science and
Yeah.
neuroscience around that. And then, the next several years were just a small sequence of events internally and externally that started prompting me, COVID being one of them. But I
Hmm.
joined a small boutique firm thinking this was the place I could really be the best version of myself. Turned out I was wrong. That company kind of went under in a big way. And so, my wife said, this is your time. The thing you've been trying to create, it's really only possible if you do it the way that you want to. So I took the leap, and yeah, it was scary and one of the scariest things of my life. But it's been a great 18 months, and I just wouldn't replace it for the world.
Wow. And how lucky are you that you have a partner that says, hey, now's the time to jump? Because usually, not a lot of people are blessed with that. They're like, no, we need this, we need stability or whatever. But you have a hell of a cheerleader to kind of
Oh,
kick you
she's
out and say it's
yeah,
time to go.
yeah, yeah. She's the best. My part of my fun fact is so in March of 2023, I got remarried. In May
Hmm.
of 2023, I turned 50. In August, we found out we were expecting. In September, my mom had a massive heart attack and almost died. Three
Oh my
weeks later,
gosh.
we found out she had stage 4 lung cancer. She's still
Oh,
alive. Um, in November, I started my own company of 2023. January of 2024, I started writing my book. In May, our baby was born. In July, I finished it. And now here we are a year later and it's released. So I will tell you,
wow.
it has been the best 18 months of my life. And doing hard things, there's science behind it.
There
And
is.
I'm just blessed and really, really excited about what's to come.
It sounds like you have a hell of a support structure too, which is
It's
great. I mean,
yeah, yeah.
that's
Like I
half
said,
of
I'm a
it.
lucky
Yeah.
guy.
Yeah. So let's talk about your book, because it does. If someone's listening, they're like, "What in the world does a book have to do with some of the normal topics?" There's so many parallels in there, and so let's talk first about the framework of the book because it's really really interesting, and then we can kind of dig into a couple of different topics like AI and HR and the workplace and all
Yeah,
the other normal stuff that we like to talk about. So
yeah.
what's the
Well,
walk us through the framework?
yeah. So as I mentioned, I wanted to have a different conversation around change. I've been doing this for years in big companies and like I said, felt like we were missing something in the world of kind of organizational change management. So the book opens with some real basic and foundational science behind what's happening to us as human beings when we try to change. And, we know more about the brain than at any point in human history. And so
Hmm.
I wanted to start to give people a real understanding of, what's going on when we try to start this journey called change. The second part of the book is really about the 6 strategies that underpin the kind of mechanisms that we can leverage to try to advance our change experience. And so there's 6 of them in the book, and it's really diving into the science and then giving you some tools to understand how to leverage that. And then the back part is really about a framework to put it all together. And what I say to people is there's a formula for change, but change is not formulaic. So no
Oh, I
two
like that.
brains are the same. So the way you combine those 6 strategies are really going to be a little bit different than the way I combine them, because we're starting in a different place. We have a different goal, whatever it may be. So,
Mhm.
I want to give people the skills to build the habit of change. And that's really what the book is all about.
So, can you share maybe one or two of the strategies?
Yeah, so there's 6 of them. It's kind of like naming the 7 dwarves, I guess. But there's kind of 2 big ones that I think are really, really important, particularly nowadays. The first one I'd like to talk about is called embracing stress. And what I tell people is that if you want to change, you've got to really fundamentally rebuild your relationship with stress. We talk a lot about stress in very chronic, traumatic, long-term terms, and of course, that's not what we're really talking about. What stress is an important and generic bodily experience that's designed to get us to move. And for a lot of people, the experience of stress makes them stop what they're trying to achieve. And as I just described in my 18-month journey, right, a lot of stress in there. But when you can
Mhm.
step into that, that's when growth is possible. So, bones grow under stress, muscles grow under stress. We become extra focused under stress. All of those things are incredibly important systems, and rather than shy away from them, the book talks about how we leverage that, and I think that's really, really important. Um, the other big piece is something around what I call initiating movement and understanding the science of motivation to rebuild your goals and help you sustain motivation. We just got past January. We're now in March, which is crazy, but January 19th is what we call Quitter's Day, and it's actually a day where most people give up on their New Year's resolutions. Uh,
Oh, okay.
yeah, and so I talk about that in the
It's
book,
also
and
the day that I love in the gym because it means that, all the people that are kicking the machines and don't know what the hell they're doing, they're gone.
that's right, that's right. Unfortunately, right, but good for you, but
Unfortunately,
bad for
yeah.
them. Yeah. So, what I talk a lot about is, most people set giant, kind of big, hairy, audacious goals, and then, they start pursuing them. And a couple weeks in, they realize, wow, this is a long journey. I'm not seeing the progress I want, and they give up. And so, if you understand what really creates motivation, how to create start stop experiences, how to redefine your goals from things I want to avoid to things I want to approach, all of that is really built around how to help you keep sustaining progress towards your goals. So those are just 2 of the 6 that I think are great ones to start with. Um, I talk a lot about shifting the environment, understanding how your environment is really a huge contributor to behavior change. The importance of repetitions, generating repetitions, failure, all of those are kind of big components to the change formula.
I like your aspect of stress. And what's the quote? Stress, scarcity creates innovation, I think is what someone said. And it made sense to me. And I just really want to kind of take a step back and dive a little bit more into the stress aspect of it. Because, to your point, some people avoid it at all cost. And it's actually, I mean, it's a biological thing. It's that fight or flight. There's something to be learned in each direction that you choose. How do you help people determine what's the good stress and what's the bad stress?
Well, I think first is really understanding there's an important piece of science behind your brain in the stress experience, particularly around doing hard things. That's really
Mhm.
important. So one of the big discoveries, I think, in the last 20 years or so, there's a portion of your brain called the anterior mid-cingulate cortex, and it's a part of your frontal lobe that is connected to the idea of stress and doing difficult things. People who are athletes, lifelong athletes, tend to have the biggest of these regions. People who live the longest have the biggest of these regions, and it is exclusively tied to the experience of doing things that are hard or that you perceive are hard or that you don't want to do. And the more you do things that are stressful and difficult, and that you don't, it could be mowing the lawn, it could be taking a cold shower, it could be speaking in public, right? It's anything that you don't want to do. You actually build a greater resilience threshold so that future things seem less hard. And
Hmm.
that's an important part of understanding that the more you do hard things, the more that hard things are less hard to do, which is sort of seems obvious, but there's actually a scientific basis behind it. So I start with that to give people an understanding that stress training is an important piece of accomplishing your goals. So it's important to start small and work your way up. It could be a 2-minute cold shower every day, right? So I do that. And it's just one of those things I do now. And it sucks and it never gets better. It never gets better. But if you can do something difficult first thing in the morning, right, then imagine how those other big, scary things that you might do kind of get a little bit easier. So that's a place to start, is really understanding the basis for stress. The second thing, as I just mentioned, is about self inducing stress. So one of the things that makes stress challenging for people is when it happens to you from outside of you, right? And so it's a very kind of Buddhist concept that when we choose our source of suffering, we experience it less. And
Right.
so the second thing is about finding ways, intense workouts in short duration, right? Spiking your heart rate, cold water exposure, sauna exposure. Breath work is another great way to actually self induce the adrenal response of
Hmm.
stress experiences. You can actually breathe your way into pretty stressful experiences. Don't do it if you're alone because you pass out and all sorts of stuff. But there's
Yeah.
ways to do
Yeah.
that.
Let's not.
Yeah, yeah. Please, be safe about it. So that's the second thing, right? And then I think the third thing is also understanding the distinction between short-term stress and chronic stress, right? And most people think any stress is traumatizing or debilitating, and certainly it's relative in scale,
Mm-hmm.
but it's also about understanding stress duration. And so if you can do things in pockets and short sprints, it's actually a better way to build up to some of these experiences that then seem, a little bit less stressful over time.
And do you find that there are people who almost induce that stress because they know that they perform better?
Yeah. So one of the things that's really important about the stress response is, excuse me, that so stress creates focus, right? So if you think about, this is the analogy I always share to people. Imagine you're driving on the highway, you're driving along, maybe you're going a little bit fast,
Mm-hmm.
and the cop car lights behind you light up and you hear the beep, right? You can imagine and you know what that stress response is, right? You feel the blood rush into your chest.
Yeah.
You sort of pause and catch a breath, right? And what happens to all of your sensory experience around you? You forget everything else, and the only thing you see is the lights in your rear view mirror, right?
Yeah.
That is an incredibly important experience that's designed to get us to pay attention to the thing that's most important. And so we can simulate that in what I would call non-threatening ways, right? Most of that is a pretty extreme response to stress, but there's things you can do with your visual system to actually create that level of extreme focus, which is important for adult learning. And one of the other big principles in the book is we just don't learn the same as adults as we do when we're kids.
Very
And
true.
so it takes incredible degrees of focus, and stress is important for that. And so there's neurochemicals that actually get washed in the brain when we're going through these experiences. That's really important for you to learn. And so without stress, learning actually is really, really hard. So it's sort of
Hmm.
a symbiotic relationship.
It's funny because there are people that I've worked for before that they procrastinate and they'll tell you, I'm putting that off because I work better under pressure.
Yeah, yeah,
And I'm just
it's a
not
real
wired
thing.
that way. I can
Yeah,
do it, but I am so much a planner. I mean, if I need content or a speaking thing done in January, I'll have it done in March because I want to just chill. But not them. And somehow I always find a way of attracting those people. I don't know what it is.
well,
Maybe we
look.
balance each other out. I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. I mean, that's sort of a difference I would call between skills and preferences and the
Mm-hmm.
physiological reality of the stress response. If
Mm-hmm.
you were under pressure and under a deadline, you'd have the same focus level experience as they do. It's
Mm-hmm.
just you're able to plan your work in a way that gets you in front of that.
Yeah.
Irrespective, the stress experience will create focus in everyone, no matter what you're doing.
No, completely agree with you. Um, so there's there's a lot of change and a lot of stress and
Yeah.
a lot going on in kind of the people world. Because and I think as an HR person or human capital professional, you're fighting it on two fronts. You're trying to fight it on behalf of your employees that you represent and helping
Yeah.
them through this, but you're also trying to navigate the change yourself, and that's like a whole different. You're fighting a battle on two fronts, which is always exhausting. How can human capitalists leverage these principles in the book to really help manage that change through this whole AI transformation we're going through?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a couple things that come to mind, and the first one we talk about taking care of yourself, and what I mean by that is really that it's important to understand the only person you can change is you. And I
Yeah.
think a lot of times we try to talk about change at scale or change across large groups. At the end of the day, the unit of measurement in change is the person. And so
Mm.
for any HR professional who's navigating this, it's important, I think, to, I would call it do all the basics, right? Get good sleep, good nutrition, exercise, all of those things are important components of just being able to deal with the stress. But I think it's also really important to understand what you can control. And one of the things I think we get lost in the experience of leading others is worrying about, sort of sphere of concern is quite large, sphere of control is a little bit smaller. And so understanding how to rebuild your goals in ways that help people be more focused on the kind of present tense and what we can control is an important starting point, I think, for most HR professionals. What I would say is, in terms of their role in leading the organization, I think it's about ushering in important but maybe difficult conversations. I think a lot of times we tend to get into a binary space in some of these moments where it's either everyone come back to the office or nobody come back, and we're going to stay flexible, and we're kind of treat these as a bit of religious debates on some level. And I think it's about understanding how to create step into stress, create uncomfortable but necessary and important conversations that we all navigate together. And those are just things I've found that are really, really critical. And then I'd say the third thing is passing these strategies on to your workforce, right? Helping them understand what is good stress, what is bad stress, how do we deal with our environment in ways that are going to help us really be more productive and be more effective. How do we roll that into our corporate strategies in ways, I think, again, these things where they become very dogmatic, kind of bipolarized discussions, all or nothing tends to get you nothing. And so I think a lot of these strategies are things that we can do to help people navigate. One I would call out is just around learning, right? And I think the COVID experience was such a great example. Part of the reason we all shifted in COVID is because we had to. There weren't a lot of backup plans. We all had to work from home. We all had to navigate the new digital video world, and it's been happening in ways that I think now are very natural. One of the things that makes this difficult from an environmental perspective is, when are we all together? When are we all apart? When are we in the office? What are we doing when we're together? Are we intentional about our time? Or is it just a haphazard kind of smattering of interactions that aren't really thoughtfully planned? That's a great place to start, because I think people get more out of those interactions when we're intentional. So those are just some things that come to mind.
No, those are great advice. Now, I mean, let's kind of shift because part of the issue with the workforce is, yeah, there's going to be a ton of new AI jobs, but it's also going to eliminate a lot of jobs, and those people being
Sure.
eliminated are not necessarily qualified to take on these new jobs. So there's a huge focus. Well, let me take that back. There is a focus, not a big enough focus, on how do we upskill, reskill, and redeploy
Yeah.
our team members. What if I'm charged with that as a CHRO or an HR professional? From kind of your framework, what would be some of the strategies that you would recommend for me to make sure that I'm doing that correctly?
Yeah. The first thing is really understanding the science. We talked about this a little bit, but the science of adult learning. So just real quickly to kind of get into the nerd speak a little bit, we learn as adults in one of two ways, really one, but there's another vehicle for learning. Something called long-term potentiation is the science term for it. It's just the science of repetition. The other one is called long-term depression, which is not the emotional state of depression. It's simply the long-term act of not doing something. one of the things that's important, I think, for HR professionals to understand is that it will always take adults longer to learn something than it does when we're younger. And I don't believe a lot of the learning programs that are designed today, you hear about quick hit micro learning, those sorts of things. Learning requires that we repeat something frequently. We need to fail in the course of that experience, and then we need feedback. So, in addition to repetitions, we need to make mistakes. And we talk about failing fast and we talk about errors, but most learning programs don't actually teach people how to absorb and learn from errors. Errors are the single largest contributor to the opportunity for neuroplasticity that you have, right? An error signals to the brain that something needs to change. But we don't give people that space to really practice these behaviors. We send them to a 30-minute online self-paced course and then we pretend that we're different. So that's the second thing. First thing is we have to repeat actions a lot. The second thing is we have to make mistakes. The third piece that I think it's important for HR professionals to understand is that when we're adults, we actually have to unlearn things. So what that means is imagine your brain, they're sort of like we don't rewire our brain. What we do is we repurpose. So imagine deer in the forest that walk through established pathways, right? Paths in the forest, and the deer travel the same path every day. That's sort of what our brain's like. What happens is we have to stop going down one path and using it for, doing email, and we have to repurpose that path for something new. And that choice to stop doing something is something that we rarely train. And so there's ways to do that. But it's sort of one of my beefs with learning in today's world. Do it quick, do it simple, do it in 5 minutes, maybe come back to it every 3 months. That's not how it works. I need to do it every day for a defined period of time. I need to practice it. I need to mess it up. I need to try to recall it. And then I need somebody to tell me what I did wrong and help me adjust. That's how we learn as adults. And most learning programs aren't really designed that way. And so, from an upskilling perspective, am I getting to experiment with AI every day? Am I getting to try to design workflows and messing them up? Am I getting a chance to build these with someone who's coaching me? If I'm not doing that, it's going to be really hard to learn.
No, that's great. How would you advise a company to give that space for mistakes? Like, what are some unique strategies?
Yeah. So, I think one of the places that's great for that is in, I would call new product, but also new process ideas. So, giving people the space to create short workflows that help maybe automate or sub automate things that are kind of driven by human interaction today. Here's a great clue: anything that requires me to send an email to another person is probably a great place to start with, hey, Trent, Michael, every week you guys email back and forth about X, Y, and Z. Is there a way to turn that into a workflow and an agent somewhere that we might be able to automate so you two could spend more time on strategy? That's a great place to give people like a safe space to start working on something that's not going to take down the ordering system or take down the whole customer service interface, right? Those are great places to start. Innovation projects are great ways to give people side jobs so that it's not in our, let's say I'm working 8 hours a day on a particular part of the operational business. Well, if I cut that back down to 7 and I give me and 5 other people from other functions an hour a day to experiment in a little ecosystem with a workflow, that's a great place to come up with new things. I've got a coach, I've got maybe a sponsor for another department who's helping me figure that out. Those are great ways to just give people room to experiment without breaking the business, right? Because that's what everyone worries about, right? We don't want to break anything that needs to stay on.
Yeah, but it's kind of counterintuitive because by not giving them that safe place to make a mistake, you're forcing them to make a mistake like in production,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean,
So,
look, it's easy to say, but the truth about mistakes is that most people don't withstand mistakes emotionally very well. We don't like to make mistakes. Nobody does.
mm,
And mistakes are not effective in an operational business where we've already cut people over the last couple of years of layoffs. Everybody's already overworked. There's not a lot of margin for error. And
right.
let's be honest, right? Efficiency is profitable. And so
Yep.
that's the challenge that we all have to make, right? And we're not going to get better in terms of new skills unless we have space to do that. and it can't happen within the normal workflows of the day. So that's a big challenge.
Hmm. And one of the things you talk a lot about is the mindset of transformation. So how, let's say I'm in HR and I just don't have that mindset. Is that something that can be cultivated? And if so,
Absolutely.
how?
Yeah, so there's a part in the book in the foundational science that we talk about. This is the pioneering work of Carol Dweck, who's been in front of the growth mindset trend for a long time. But there's actually been studies done on two particular mindsets that I'd encourage people to look up. The first one I just mentioned. So the work by Carol Dweck around growth mindset is absolutely trailblazing, and that can be trained. The second one is called a stress is enhancing mindset. And what that means is, back to our conversation of stress, is it's the difference between sort of, or maybe saying, I know this doesn't feel good, but it's good for me, right? It's not happening to me, it's happening for me. It's the idea that stress is productive. There's been many studies that have been done where if we can combine both of these belief systems into ourselves, we actually sustain higher levels of motivation. We experience less stress and performance goes up. Now, there's usually a little bit of a dip in the beginning of that as we start to learn new things, but we can absolutely train these attitudes and beliefs. I tend to be of the mindset, this is a great quote that's actually in the book, which is it's easier to act your way into new ways of thinking than think your way into new ways of acting. Because I'm just a
Hmm.
big believer that action creates movement, movement creates motivation, but it's really a symbiotic relationship. And so having a growth mindset, having a stress is enhancing mindset, look up the studies. I actually reference them in the book. Real trailblazing work that can have a direct correlation on performance.
Okay, so say that quote again about thinking versus acting, because
Yeah.
I think that one we need to put a little bit more emphasis on that one, because that was like a brain ninja, so it's
Yeah.
kicking
Sorry, I
around in my
breezed
head.
through
So
that
say
one
it's
quick.
no, yeah, say that one again.
Yeah. It's easier to act your way into new ways of thinking than think your way into new ways of acting. And it's really built on this idea that movement creates motivation, right? And it's this idea that when I move in the direction of my goals, I learn through experience, I learn through repetition and failure, I sustain higher motivation, and I build the belief systems around I am someone who does hard things. Once you do that, I've achieved a level of growth mindset. And by enduring stress, I have demonstrated a stress is enhancing orientation. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't start with those belief systems and learn more about them. But I'm just a big believer that when you're nervous, move. When you're scared, move. When you're uncertain, move. When you're feeling good, move. Moving in the direction of your goals is the single greatest way to sustain motivation, even if you're messing up.
It's funny. There's a book, and I listen to her podcast. I watch her on TikTok. Is it Melanie Gibbons? Anyway, she wrote a book, and the whole premise is instead of doing a count up, you do a count down, because your
Mm.
brain is automatically triggered to make a move on whatever that last thing is.
Yeah.
And I remember her telling the story in the book of, she would always sleep in or oversleep or whatever, and she wanted to get up and start working out. And so when her alarm would go off, she would lay in the bed and count down from 10.
Yep.
And like she just said that got to be her discipline. And so it reminds me of what you said, don't think, move. That was her whole thing, is like, she goes, the first day, did I work out for 30 minutes at 5 in the morning? No, I didn't. She goes, I did 10 minutes on the treadmill, and I said, hey, I accomplished a goal. And she goes, but that was a win. I was out of the bed, I was doing something. She goes, the next day I did it for 15 minutes.
Yep.
And it gets back to what you were talking about earlier, the whole New Year's thing. I'm going to cut all sugar out of my diet. I'm going to work out for an hour and a half. I'm going to run a mile.
Yeah.
Come on now.
We
If
stack
all
too
you've
many
been
things
doing,
together. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and whenever I advise people, I'm like, look, eat great for the first 5 days and have a cheat day. And then
Yeah.
eat another 5 days and have a cheat day. Because over time, you're going to find that your body responds to the cheat day in a way that you don't like, and
That's
you're
right.
reprogramming yourself.
That's right. That's right. And I
Because
think there's some other great wisdom in there, which I talk about in the book, is reframing the start as the goal. right? And
Hmm.
so imagine if you ran 4 laps around a track, right? And you're going to run a mile. The first lap, you get out of the gate pretty hot, right? You're like, hey, I'm
Right.
jamming, I'm going.
Hmm.
Laps 2 and 3, oh man, they drag on forever. But when you make the last turn on lap 4, what happens? We become naturally more energized, right? And we become more motivated to finish. So part of the trick, what's so great about the countdown, 3, 2, 1, go, that's the first win of the day. That's the first goal. The first goal
Yep.
is just to get up. And so a lot of that is about goal reframing. And I think it's beautifully said. The other thing I tell people is set 4 goals a year and you do 1 goal per quarter and just
Mm.
focus on the one thing and just get that done. Because again, what you're trying to build is the habit of change. And I said this when I wrote the book, and it's kind of in the intro, is when you get done reading this book, I want you to be someone who believes change isn't just possible, it's necessary, and that
Right.
we should be changing our entire lives. And the more you self-induce it, the better off you are. And on the other side of that experience is a version of you that you haven't yet met and can't wait to get to know. So, I hope
Hmm.
that's what people will walk away with.
Well, I mean, we were talking about it, before we jumped on, just kind of the whole health journey.
Yeah.
If I had had this mindset whenever I was in my 20s, it would be, I had all the hormones, had all the, all the recovery and everything. It would have been fantastic. But looking at, kind of setting those short term goals, I am amazed and frustrated sometimes by people who come and go, I've got these 10 things and I haven't made progress on any of them. And
Yeah.
they're like big ass goals. And I'm like,
Yeah.
it makes sense. I always give the analogy of, taking a 4-year old to the cereal aisle and say, pick a cereal. You're going to be there for 30 minutes. There's
Yeah.
too many decisions. But if you come and you go, here are the 4 things, which one of these 4? I want that one. Cool. We're out. And I think that, trying to what's that old stupid saying, boy the ocean, so many
Yeah.
people are still trying to do that. If that's what you're accustomed to, like, how do you unwire that? Because if you continue down that track, you're just going to avoid change at all cost.
Yeah, it's tough because, one of the ways we set goals tends to be because we are trying to change behaviors that we feel are the most negatively salient, right?
Hmm.
Like, why do people have health goals at the beginning of the year? Well, it's because they probably didn't treat themselves pretty well the year before. Or maybe
Right.
you're in a difficult relationship and you're arguing about a topic, or you're having a point of tension in a relationship with a spouse or family member, or you can't get that promotion, right? You're staring at the thing in your life that is the most emotionally uncomfortable. Those tend to be the hardest goals to go accomplish, right? And so if you stack 4 or 5 of those together, it becomes pretty deflating when you're not making progress, right? You step on the scale the next morning and nothing happens, or you go to work the next day and you didn't get promoted. So the first thing I tell people is start to think about goals differently. Try not to think about the things you're trying to avoid, but think about the things you're trying to approach, and redesign them into um, ways in which you have opportunities to satisfy that goal on a daily basis. So rather than a
Hmm.
goal of, I want to lose 20 pounds, make a goal as, I'm somebody who makes healthy choices, right? That means that every time I approach food or exercise, I get an opportunity to make a healthy choice, right? Instead of thinking
Hmm.
about a goal of, I want to be a better father or better mother or whatever, better parent, think about it as a goal that says, I want to be more present with my kids. Now, what that means is every time I'm around them, I have an opportunity to get a win, right? And it's not so dramatic in terms of its entire arc of all this stuff. It doesn't take me 12 months. It takes me 30 minutes to go do that
Right.
and execute that goal, and then I do it again, right? So that's part of the way of what it's called goal reframing. And there's a big section in the book about that.
Great. I like the 3 by 3. So I start every week with, what are the top 3 things that I want to get accomplished by the third day of the week. And everybody's like, that's Wednesday. Well, I mean, if you're off on Monday, that's Thursday. So that's why I like the 3 by 3. And then
Yeah.
I take those and then say, okay, today is Tuesday. Where am I against those 3? What's my goal? And now I break it down to, what are the 3 things that I need to do in order to hit the big goal by 3 o'clock today. And then
Mm,
everything else comes after that. Like, I don't work on anything until I can get those 3 things
yeah.
done. for me, it's just a way to kind of break it down to where I'm not overwhelmed, because I'm one of those that'll walk into a dirty room and just look and go, I don't even know where to start, and I just shut the door, and it's like, I'll deal with this later, you know.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's a
I do a lot of coaching with people about do the next best thing, right?
mm,
Which is when we have a lot to do, a lot of times we worry about doing everything. And the coaching I give people is what's the next best thing you could do? And focus on that until you're done with that thing. Once that
mhm,
thing's done, what's the next best thing you can do after that? And the truth is, it doesn't even have to be the best thing. What I'm just trying to build in people is do the next thing and do the next
mhm,
thing. You know, you have a dirty kitchen. You could clean up anything that you wanted to. Find one thing, put it away, move to the next thing, put it away. And goals are really not that
mhm.
different. So it's kind of in line with what you were saying right there.
And it's funny, I didn't realize until this conversation that goals are just another word for measuring change. Like
Correct.
I never made that connection. You know, because as I was listening to us talk about the KPIs and the goals and everything, I'm like, someone coming in halfway is going to be like, what does this have to do with change? But like, I never really understood
Yeah.
that's the fundamental metric of change. That's
And
fascinating.
you know, I actually you're talking about HR professionals earlier on, and maybe just to make this point, I think KPIs and ROI indicators in companies are some of the most damaging things that we
Yeah.
have around because you know they're the dollar equivalent of I want to lose 30 pounds, right? I want to save 10 million, 100 million. And you don't do that all at once. And so you get leaders who
Hmm.
are constantly saying, what about now? What about now? Did we save it all now? And back to the science of learning, it takes time, it takes repetition, it takes failure, it takes setbacks. And you know, I think any HR professional that has the opportunity to coach their CEO team on understanding what's really required, building the inputs to change rather than just tracking the outputs,
Hmm.
it's a huge win. And that's what we're talking about, right? It's just about repeating actions, not relentlessly and obsessively focusing on outcomes, because that'll squash your motivation in a hurry.
Absolutely. So what advice would you give for, you know, the HR profession that's like in this very tumultuous time of change and transformation?
You know, I think it starts with leading by example. And I think that's the big piece for all of us is that if we want others to change, we've got to start demonstrating those skills ourselves. We've got to start making mistakes, being open about that, experimenting with technology, having hard conversations, challenging our own belief structures, trying new things. All of that, I think, is a way. You know, HR, I think, has an opportunity. We've heard this for years, right? HR becoming more ingrained in the business, leveling up on
Hmm.
operational concepts, becoming more of a steward of, you know, the business itself. And I think really the opportunity here, while that still is in play, is always about demonstrating to the executive teams what a leader in today's day and age looks like, about being vulnerable, about having hard conversations, about trying new things and experimenting with change, bringing others into that process. To me, that's always the thing that I try to do. Again, I can't change anyone else, but I can demonstrate to you what good change looks like by embodying those principles. And I'd start there.
Great. Well, I've definitely learned a lot. Like I said, you've dropped a couple of ninjas, and I'll probably be kicking around the rest of the day. So
Love it.
I may be pinging you later, going, okay, I need to chat through this.
Let's do
You've
it
kind of
anytime.
you've changed my mindset. So are you ready for some rapid fire?
I love it. Let's do it.
All right. So what is a book that changed your perspective on business, or well, let's do business or HR or just in general, just changed you personally?
Well, I think, you know, that uh, I reference it in the book, and it's not a book about business, but it's a book by Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett called How Emotions Are
Hmm.
Made. And it really is a transformative piece of groundbreaking work about the science of understanding what you perceive of as an emotion.
Hmm.
And the short version of that book is that our brain is a prediction machine. I talk about it in the book, and your brain is constantly guessing what's going to happen next. And the distance between the accuracy of that guess and what actually happens is what causes your emotional experience. And it's just a mind blowing, no pun intended, uh, dive into how the brain works. And for me, because when I interact with an executive or any other person, I understand immediately what's happening when they're guessing about what's coming next and where that guess
Yes.
comes from. And so that's just for me, it's been a huge book.
Good. And what is a people problem that you had to solve that you learned something, and what did you learn?
Wow, all I do is solve people problems. There's so many, yeah,
Right.
there's so many to pick from. I'll tell you. Look, I have a client right now that is a healthcare services client, and we were at a hospital last week. They make the food and do all the housekeeping in the rooms and all of that. And we were down. I've been working with the CEO to build their first ever set of corporate values, and they've purchased a lot of companies and kind of grown through acquisition. And
Okay.
we're down in the kitchen with 25 people, many of them non-English speakers, and we're trying to talk about culture. And we have all these big fancy words for certain things, and at the end of the day, people want to be trusted, they want to be empowered, they want to feel like they're part of a team, they want to be appreciated. And it was like, here we are talking about these big concepts at the CEO level, and at the end of the day, it's about real people doing hard work, serving
Mhm.
others. And what's the language that makes them feel connected? Because it's not the same language that sits at the executive level. And so for me, it was just a reminder: less is more, in terms of some of the fancy concepts we try to put out, and more connection is more. And it's about managers doing good work on the front lines with people they care about. And it's just such a great reminder. It was just such a joy to be there.
That's awesome. I love that. And then where can people find and engage with you?
A great place to start is my website, michaeljlopez.coach, and all of my socials are on there. We're both active on LinkedIn. That's how we found each other. We're both part of the Top Voice
Right.
community. So that's a great place to start. I'm most active on LinkedIn and Instagram. I do have a YouTube channel, Michael J. Lopez 9, which I do my kind of podcast series that I've started on there, which you'll be on
Okay.
here in a couple months.
Absolutely. Hope so.
But the website's a great place to start, and you can go ahead and connect from there.
Awesome. And where can they get the book?
You can get the book on there. There's a link. It's on Amazon, Barnes and Noble,
Okay.
Ingram, all the places that you would normally order books from.
Awesome. And then what's your mic drop moment for the audience?
Well, I think, for me, it's back to this principle that the only person that you can change is you. And, I live my life by three pretty simple principles. The first one is that my purpose is to help people into uncomfortable and difficult experiences and conversations, because that's where growth happens.
Hmm.
My second obligation is to give them tools to be successful in that experience. And the third is to lead by example. And so the things I talk about in the book, I live my life that way every day. And it's my purpose to be the kind of person that others will look at and believe change is possible. So that's the mission I'm on, and it's the mission I'll keep doing.
I love it. I love it. Well, I have definitely learned a lot. And I know that anyone listening, you've probably put some mind bombs in their brains as well. So I look forward to continuing the conversation and hope that everyone will go out and get the book. It is definitely worth the read. So thank you so much again for joining the Human Capitalist podcast.
Thank you, Trent.
All right. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Human Capitalist. This channel is all about community, so comment, subscribe, and join the conversation. This is Trent Cotton, your human capitalist, signing off. Remember, invest in yourself, own your potential, and keep building your own human capital. I'll see you next time.